Yes, thank you, Richard. Thank you for the invitation. I hope you can see my presentation now. I'm going to give you a short introduction to how we assess the threats to Atlantic salmon in Norway. First, before I go to the threats, I'll have a little bit of background into something similar that John showed in the last talk. This is the pre-fishery abundance, the number of returning salmon to Norway, assessed annually from 1983. And the pattern we saw from Scotland is a similar pattern we see in Norway, that there is quite a sharp decline from more than 1 million fish returning to about 500,000 in the last years. This figure also shows the distribution of these returning fish into the marine fishery and into the river fishery, and what is left in the spawning populations. And due to strong restriction in the marine fishery, we see that has declined, and whereas the river fishery has maintained more or less the same, with a slight decrease in the number of fish caught by the river fishery. And the effect is that we actually have recent years have quite an increase in the size of the spawning stock. This reduction in the number of returning fish to Norway is obviously due to a large part to poorer survival condition in the high seas. Because this is looking much like what we saw in Scotland and around the distribution area of Atlantic salmon. However, there is a regional trend. This is the relative change in pre-fishery abundance in the 4 major Norwegian regions that can be linked to regional pressures. In Northern Norway, there's been basically a very small and no change. Southern Norway has bounced back due to liming, where a lot of the population were eradicated due to acidification. Whereas we see a pattern here where Western Norway, in particular in many years, had a very poor development, and recently also Central Mid-Norway has been declining, and these are linked to regional factors affecting pressures affecting the stocks. I represent the Norwegian Scientific Advisory Committee for Atlantic salmon. I'm just going to tell you a little about that committee. It was established by the Agency of Environment in Norway. And it consists of currently of 13 scientists from 7 different institutions. We do not represent the institution, so we are representing ourselves. And they are all active scientists working, providing the management with advice on different topics. And it's been, I would say, a large success to have this committee. It was actually made on based on a template from the Irish system. And it's been largely successful in that we have become the most central guiding body for Atlantic salmon management in Norway. We do, among other things, annual assessment of the attainment of conservation limits, and we've done that since 2009. We also assess what is called a management target, which is a confidence limit attainment in 3 out of the 4 last years, or a 75% probability of a confidence limit attainment. So this map just shows the situation. We assess about 200 population every year. And this is an illustration of whether or not they attain their targets or not. Then annual assessment is based largely on drift, snorkeling and counting system, and there has been a tremendous increase in the number of rivers where we do this drift counting and other counting system. For those that we do not have this kind of count, we use catch statistics and estimates of exploitation rates. We ask every year for the season and the rules and the flow conditions, fishing conditions, and the number of fishing licenses that has been used. And we use a simulation model to account for uncertainty, both in the conservation limit and in the exploitation rate and estimates of spawning escapement. This figure shows what has happened in terms of the total exploitation with these open squares since early 80s, and the proportion of fish of stocks that has attained their conservation limits. And back when we had the large drift net fishery, we had exploitation rate as high as 80%, and we started and the drift net fishery was closed in 1989, and we also downscaled a lot of the marine fisheries and some in the river as well. And we are now down to a total exploitation of about between 40 and 45%. And what we also see is that there has been a sharp increase in the number of stocks, proportional stocks that has attained the conservation limit, and particularly after 2009, when we introduced this management according to conservation limits. And we are now at a level where more than 80% of the stocks actually attain their spawning targets. One very important piece of legislation in Norway, and it was approved by the King in the Royal Decree in 2013. This is called the quality norm for wild Atlantic salmon. This quality norms says that the salmon must attain their conservation limits, but also that they should have a normal harvestable surplus. That is a surplus that is given by the survival conditions at sea. And they should not be genetically impacted by farmed salmon, the genetic integration. The reason why we also, this norm also says that we should have a normal harvestable surplus is that legislation in Norway in general says that salmon population should be conserved, protected, but there should also be a potential for exploitation that is fishery. And a nice thing about this norm is that if a minimum of good quality is not obtained, a relevant authority should implement measures to restore the quality. So this is a very important part of the management of salmon in Norway. That if this norm isn't met, then authorities should do something to improve the quality again. So this quality norm, we do an assessment every 5 years for 200 of Norway's 430 salmon stocks. There are two axes which are combined. These are the conservation limit and harvested surplus attainment axis, which are combined. And then we have, these are combined by the genetic integrity axis, which is currently assessed by doing genetic studies and estimate the degree of integration of farmed salmon. And so the idea is that all population should be within this green area of good or very good quality, and if not, something should be done. We have a remaining 250 stocks as well, which are not used, cannot be assessed by this system, partly due to lack of catch statistics and actually fishery at all. So we also done an assessment of the status of this using a prediction model and spatial autocorrelation. And these assessments are then benchmarked against local data and consultation with regional or local managers. So this gives an overview, the last one, on the status of all 448 salmon stocks in Norway. And it's kind of a depressing picture. About 40% is in the poor or very poor status, and only about 20% is in the good or very good status. For each of these stock, we have a classification of the major impact factors. It's a large table, but you can see some of these major factors that we assess for each of these populations. And we rank the effects from 0 to 3, depending on the relative strength of all of these different pressures. We have then a table with every Norwegian salmon stocks where we have the status and all of these impact factors, pressures scaled from 0 to a very strong effect. This means that we also can combine this into a national picture of the anthropogenic factors and the relative effect. This is scaled with the effect size. And we see that salmon lice is by far the largest factor reducing salmon populations in Norway, followed by farm salmon escapees and hydropower, and also habitat alterations. Already back in 2009, we started in the committee to rank the different threats. It was one of our major obligations, and we did this by establishing a system in which we combine the effect of the different factors and their likely development in terms of what's happening in the future. So if you see at the effect axis, we assess the number of affected stocks, their geographical distributions, typical effects on production, the number of critical endangered or lost stocks, and implemented mitigation measures. For the development axis, we assess the potential for effective measures, the likelihood of further losses in production, and the likelihood of more stocks becoming critically endangered and lost. And then we get a system where we have on one end of the system stabilized loss factors, and on the other end expanding population threats that can actually threaten the population and existence of the populations. So this is the latest threat in assessment. When we started up with this in 2019, there was quite a bit of fuss about this way of doing it. Some of the industry didn't like it, but what was interesting was that nobody got into the actual assessment of each of the factors and said that's plain wrong. Today, this threat assessment, I would say, is well established as a very good way of describing the different threats. So management can prioritize among which factors to work extensively with. And in the current system, escaped farm salmon and salmon lice from fish farms are ongoing and expanding threats in this very red area over here. Whereas Gyrodactylus salarius, the parasite that we introduced to Norway reactively quite a few years ago, acidification, hydropower, and habitat alterations are stabilized population threats. So to just end, I think this way of assessing threat has been very useful and is a very good tool for prioritizing management actions for the management in Norway.